Just wait 1 minute. Okay, go.
Okay, thank you. Hi everyone. I'm Valentina Dolciotti, editorial director of Diversity magazine. I am delighted and honored to host this event, moderated by Rose Cartolari, leadership consultant and advisory board of our magazine, and a friend. This panel confirms that the generational topic is an international and actual interest, and that Italy needs to listen to and take inspiration from the strategies adopted by the organization represented today by these wonderful speakers. So, therefore, I am very happy to pass the word to Rose, whom I thank again for a constant presence. So, Rose, to you. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you for the panelists to being here. Our topic today is very much tied to the diversity issue around generations. We've got 5 generations in the workplace today. And so today our panelists are going to look at this issue of how do you deal with people all across a spectrum, making sure in an age where we can still ensure that we give individual attention, individual growth opportunities, and capture sort of the aspirations and potential of all the different generations. So today on the panel with me, and this is in alphabetical order, and I'm going to read it, we have from State Street, Monica Jankowski-Rangelov, from SAP, Anis Joseph, who's from my part of the world as well, from actually born in the same state in India, which is unusual. So welcome. We have Heidi Robertson, ABB. And Heidi, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from Norway.
Norway. And Monica, I think you're in Poland?
Correct. I'm in Poland, in Krakow.
And Anis?
From Bangalore in India.
Bangalore, okay. And then we have Pavel Subert, who's calling in from Vienna, right? Yes, of course, who's a co-founder of East Meets West. And Alison Zimmerman, who is calling in from Zurich, right? And Alison is with Catalyst. So we have a great panelist, and I think I'll go ahead and start right away. Alison, maybe you can start us because you know, there's a lot of research I know that Catalyst does on women, of course, but could you talk to us about some of the findings with women with respect to the to this whole big spectrum and what the research is telling us about the needs at both ends of the spectrum?
Yeah, absolutely. There's often I would say a belief or a perception that ageism is happening on both spectrums. And it's true, it is in different ways, shapes, and forms. But what we've seen when we've looked at studies, not only ours, but other studies out there, we find out that the older generation, particularly older women, are being discriminated much more. And men as well are being discriminated as they go older, as they're older and go older. But when you look at complaints of age discrimination, it is also reporting that it's the older generation. There are a lot of stereotypes on women and men of the younger generation, which we'll hear from the rest of the panel. But when I talk about gender and talk about women, it's really understanding in the employee life cycle where women are meeting certain challenges. And so one of the barriers that we see is we know that when women start right out of their MBA, when we did a study looking at top MBA students coming from top business schools, we found out that women were lagging behind in salary and roles from day one. So there's this belief that you have to negotiate, you have to do this, you have to do that. And there's been for years a lot of fixation on fixing women to fit into the workplace. And it doesn't work because that's not where the problem is. So when we look at ageism, and for the discussion today, and we talk about gender specifically, we know that because women are starting out at less income for various reasons, that the older women are facing a real gender pay gap penalty, and they are more likely to be let go, especially during times of COVID when you had restructuring and jobs were furloughed. That older generation was really paying a price for it. But it doesn't mean that all is well in the younger generation, that they're experiencing a lot of experience bias, and the ageism they face is, oh, you're not ready for this because you need to be older. And that's the other side of the coin. But coming back to women, I would say one of the barriers that we see, and we highlight this a lot, is women they constantly have to prove they are good enough. At the same time, according to our research, they're being held to a higher standard of performance, whereas men are promoted based on potential. And so it could be as simple as saying, I don't think she's ready for this next role, or I think she needs a little more managerial, or maybe next year. Whereas with many men, what's happening is saying, you know what, let's give him a shot. He's displayed this experience. Let's try it out. He'll figure it out. It is very subtle, but we can always hear it. And when we look deeper at companies, we can see when the bias is playing out. And so when it comes to age, I also have to call out, you think about what women go through in a life cycle, in their life in general, and men too. There are many, I'm not going to go into menopause today, but when we go, everybody's like, don't go there, don't go there. But no, I'm not going there. But think about all the transitions that women go through. And so when companies ask, why are women falling out of the workplace in their early 50s. There's a whole other element there as well that we don't have time to talk today, but we need to start to normalize mental health. We need to normalize when there are issues. We need to normalize language of life changes and not see it as a barrier for advancement, to see it as a need for more dialogue. So I went off piste, I would say, in Switzerland. So I'm going to pass it back to you. But thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks. I just realized that I didn't let everybody know the structure. We're going to do a round of questions and then come back and sort of share with each other some other issues. And then we'll also go to the audience for Q&A. So thanks. What I think is interesting is this whole issue of women aging specifically, right? There's so much focus has been capturing the potential, and we're going to talk about that later on, but you don't hear the discussion of what are the issues we need to look at as people age, but as both men and women age. So thanks. Monica, Allison talked about both end of these spectrums with women, but where you are in a new and emerging Europe, if you want, in a certain sense, in that part of Europe, from a business perspective, with its own challenges, and your pipeline, from what I understand, is fairly young, want to grow, very ambitious, and I'm wondering, how does having such a young group of people that now you've got to move through and mature, how does that impact both your short-term and your long-term business processes, business strategies?
Thank you, Rose. So let me give you some kind of a outlook or overview in terms of the company I'm representing today. So I work for State Street, and we operate in financial industry. Of course, we are a bank, and we operate in many locations across EMEA region, and with the biggest populations in Poland, UK, and Ireland. And I was going just to focus on these three. because it's very interesting if you compare these. So UK and Ireland represent locations that are privileged due to the fact that they are, for example, English native speaking countries. And this is the first filter, I would say, because when we are talking about talent pools, we need to talk about, those that have got ambitions, but have got also skills, right? So for international organizations, language is this natural filter for recruited talents. And if the candidate is highly competent, but is not English or German speaker, these are mainly two business languages, they are regarded as not suitable. And in locations like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, this central and eastern part of Europe, foreign language speaking skills is exactly this filter for the candidates. And usually generations older than X are not so fluent in English, additionally with limited corporate experience, which is, very important in that case. This way, you see the employees' population is limited in access to right competencies in the market, especially for the, so-called entry roles, as we call it in the industry. So we need to remember that international business in these locations in Central and East part of Europe has been present only for the last 15, 20 years, whereas in Western countries, it was hiring and upskilling their staff, many more decades ago. This is a natural trend, showing that, high-profile roles used to be located in the West, also in the US. In our case, as our headquarters is based in Boston. So with globalization, aging markets and societies, the trends in these are changing. More high-profile roles are requiring, strong competencies are shifted to these newer locations. Not only due to the fact of cost efficiency, not only because of that. Another important factor is the need to support digitalization, right, which is a natural space for development and I would say innovation within young generations like Z or Y, millennials, right, as we used to call them. Technology and access to digitalization skills in Poland, for example, most loud currently Ukraine, like this Eastern bloc of countries. We have great access there to talent in terms of, developers and IT staff specialists, specializing in cybersecurity, etc. And they are very, excellently educated and are very available. Also traveling very often to other countries across Europe, just like shifting to the West, I would say. So when we were to compare, I would see it as Eastern Europe promise innovation, progressive attitudes, where Western locations seem to be more traditional or with more stable client-facing relations and experience, right? Mm-hmm. So just summarizing, I would say that millennials make up the vast majority of the workforce. Having a workforce that recognizes and accommodates multiple generations is essential in building a diverse and inclusive workforce. And while millennials are generally known for being tech-savvy, we need to remember that they are respectively young, right? Mm. And they started in early 80s. The older millennials might not have the same proficiency with tech tools, right, as younger counterparts, right? So when we are talking about generations, it's so important to understand really where the people are in terms of the competency, maturity, experiences, and factual skills, because we can't put, the tag of generation to everybody, because, from the, let's say, being born in the late 70s, in my case, makes me generation X, but it would mean simply different things in Poland than, for example, in the UK. So you can also see this at work in communication practices, for example. Sometimes certain employees are more comfortable using social channels, for example, group chats functions, etc. And on the other hand, the older generations, but not necessarily might enjoy communication channels. So sometimes are lacking information or they are not so engaged.
Absolutely.
So it's so important to adjust this awareness of our organizations, what works for whom, and how we should, apply these solutions for respective target groups.
Absolutely. I mean, and these, you've touched much like Allison did also here on this issue of a different range of skills based on when you came into the workplace and what was happening then. And I think what that leads us to, and in fact, the question I would like to ask you, Anis, is, when we have, we said 5 generations, it may be 3, it may be 5, but there's a range of ages in our workplace today and a range of skills. And so one of the big challenges today is reconciling the expectations of an employer or a company or shareholders who've got to get stuff out on the market ahead of time, low cost, and expectations of so many different groups. I would love if you could talk to us a little bit about your experience at SAP and some of the sort of the key challenges and learnings that you've had around this issue.
Absolutely, Rose. With 4 to 5 generations in the workplace, there is definitely a need to close a gap between newer generation expectations and aspirations and the expectations of the companies as employers from their workplace. Now, as we heard from the other speakers, as we know, there is a lot of effort that goes into bringing this awareness itself. But in order to close the gap, we need to also look more deeply into the processes that we have, the communication on how we did, like Monica just now mentioned, and also the leadership enablement. And rightly put by Monica, it means different in different regions. It means different to different generations. One example that I wanted to highlight here was if we take the Asian cultural context. Respect for elders is a value people grow up with, and they are supposed to manifest it in the way they might give way for an elder, in the way they treat someone as with the respectful term of sir or ma'am. And when they see that that is not practiced in the professional workplace, it can be assumed that there's a lack of respect, and this happens between all generations. Now, sometimes this leads to a lack of mutual respect and it causes tension and it causes dissonance in the groups, especially when younger people are in the roles of authority. Now, raising these awareness of these subtle differences can help acknowledge biases and thus drive change within the self and also people around. At SAP, we do something very simple in our Busting Generational Myths workshop. We often ask the question, how many friends do you have from each generation? It always shocks me that a significant percentage of our colleagues prefer to hang out with people from their own generation or closer to their age group. Now, this awareness begs the question, what can I do consciously to include and nurture inclusion among my colleagues? Can I encourage lunch and coffee sessions with someone who may not be of the same age or generation at that time? To work with multi-generations and be successful about it, they need to really work with each other, able to see eye to eye, work together and celebrate the cross-generational intelligence that you can bring together when you come. Now, at SAP, this is what some of the things that we really do. And we also think about it in terms of the whole idea of bringing together all generations. So we not only look at the millennials, but we also look at the Gen Xers, the baby boomers, and in some cases, even the traditionalists who might still be in the workplace itself. So the important thing being not to leave anybody behind. So this is what I'd like to share from my perspective.
Yeah, bringing people together is sort of where we're at. And I have just been, and I wish I could claim some sort of generational gap or misunderstanding, but it's all me. And I'm mortified to say, Christelle, I didn't introduce you. Christelle I am so sorry. My screen, she's over here. This is why I wish I could say it was technology, but it's all me. My apologies. Christelle is from Deloitte. She's French, but in Italy. We're so happy to join you, to have you joining us, and you're always a thought leader on so many diversity and inclusion issues. And my apologies, I don't have an excuse. Sorry. Pavel, we were just talking about bringing people together. Anna was saying, how do we, whether it's different regions or different age, you don't deal with regions and ages. You have started a foundation actually with somebody who is from a different generation from you, that supports and gives voice to LGBTIQ presence and rights in Eastern Europe, which I think is very interesting, particularly because if we're looking for change and if we're looking to try, get younger generations through, we've heard all of this exchange of ideas and information, so role models are very big. So my question to you is, it must be tough in environments where you don't have much of a voice, where there's a lot of political and legal issues. How do you find a role model? How do you and how do you be a role model? And if you could tell us a little bit about how you and Ludo sort of met and created this organization around specifically this issue and bringing people together in the community.
Happy to share some insights. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be back at Diversity Magazine, be here on the stage, and also this time balance a little bit the gender diversity on the stage, right? No, joke aside, you said East meets West, so that's organization which I represent today. Yes, we are actually searching and finding role models, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. And why do we do it? Because we want to increase the social acceptance of LGBTIQ people. And we thought that actually with finding examples that can serve as a kind of somebody to aspire to, so role model, is something valid and can help the people in Central and Eastern Europe. Now, maybe a little bit about East meets West. So we are not a huge corporate like others you see here on the stage. We are still a small organization, but we have moved from 0 to roughly 1,500 professionals in the East meets West network, which over the last 7-8 years, I would still think it's remarkable. But coming back, we really started from 0. We had basically no contact. So we had just very few contacts in Central and Eastern Europe. But what I think one of the success factors was that me and Ludo, we are completely different. So one of the things where we are different is that we are from different generations. So I was born in 77, so it's Generation X, and Ludo is now freshly retired. So he's this classical baby boomer. Now, when you bring these people together, what I suddenly realized that we had more to offer, and we had more to actually how to engage with people, because maybe I was better in, I don't know, logistics and technical things, but Ludo was way better in connecting to some organization and individuals, because he, with his also somehow this seniority and credibility, it simply was an door opener for us. So this was the way how I would say, yes, maybe if it would be like 2 Pavels or 2 Ludos, we would not be successful. And this somehow probably also supports this whole idea that this generation for diversity makes sense and is super important to look at it. Maybe a few more things about building the network. Well, those countries where there are difficulties, like, I don't know, let's say Poland, let's say Hungary. Yes, it's not easy to find people and engage with the people. But I think here the recipe would be simply try it, right? As we tried a few weeks ago, we had a specific event for Hungary. So maybe the audience here know that in Hungary there are already two legislative pieces which are against the LGBTIQ community. One of them is about change of gender. So people cannot change the gender in their ID documents. The second is then so publicly in front of minors, you cannot promote LGBTIQ. So what we have said is that, how do we actually tackle it? How do we still find, again, like role models? So we called for an event. It became a series of events, and we are looking at diversity inclusion at workplace. And we brought 5 first corporates on the stage who simply acted as role models because they shared what they do when it comes to Hungary. And you could see that actually it is possible. And this is the way how we are kind of approaching this whole role modelship. We simply identify the people and we just help them to bring them on a stage. I mean, then we cannot talk instead of them, but yeah, we give them the space, I would say.
Do you find it skewed to one age group or another, Pavel?
Say yes. So when you look at younger generations, and maybe we can talk about it a little bit later as well, there is definitely a difference when it comes to younger generation and then expectation when it comes to inclusion, diversity. But it's also about coming out. And there is a difference, and there are also studies which say that younger generations tend to come out also earlier.
Mm-hmm. Great, great. Very thought-provoking. Thank you. And now, actually, Christelle, Deloitte has been, quite active both internally within Deloitte, but also in the communities in looking at how am I going to build leadership traits that are constantly expanding to reach, to take care of the workforce that I have now. And I was wondering if you could talk to me about some of these, inclusive leadership skills traits and, in rolling them out, what are the things that you found that have worked for you? What are some of the things that have been obstacles or challenges for you to get through?
Okay, so in Deloitte, regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have an intersectional and holistic approach that focuses on specific pillars while fostering, I will say, intergenerational dialogue. On that, we focuses mainly on 4 pillars. Creating a collaboration between generation. In that, for example, I will share concrete example. It has been a CEO advisory board has been built whose members are young professionals. This idea was, to take into account the perspectives, the ideas of a younger generation to help, have a vision of the company for a short and medium term. One of the action they launched is creating this Ask Me, which is a virtual regular talk during which the managing director of Deloitte Consulting responds directly to questions from our younger professionals. Another initiative that we have organized with our network of diversity, equity, and inclusion ambassador is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Talks, where we invite senior leaders to share, their opinion about gender parity, generation gap, and so on. Another initiative is also through our all-in workshop aiming at developing inclusive leadership, where we mix the generation during the workshop, so senior leader, younger manager, so that they have a positive, I will say, exchange about how activating these traits, because the perspective can be different coming from different generation. The second pillar is to try to also stimulate a dialogue through, I will say, a sense of community. So we have asked and invited senior leaders to be sponsors of our main communities, which are, for example, GLOBE, LGBTQI+ communities, women in tech community, and their role is not only to sponsor, but to take part to the managing committee of the community, so that together the actions, initiatives are decided and they can grasp the perspective of a different generation. The third pillar is really regarding, I will say, female leadership representation. Since 2018, we developed a female leadership journey that this year has been enriched by a sponsorship program where senior leaders are sponsor and advocates and allies to female representation and become so change engine. So through that program, there is really an exchange between sponsor and sponsoree about these different perspectives from different generations, and it's a real enrichment. And then I will say the last pillar is that we try to improve and have an impact, I will say, outside our company, which is really linked to our purpose, meaning that we have organized, I will say, exchange to different generations through two recent initiatives, like Girls Takeover, organized during the International Day of the Girl. It was about a digital thinking hackathon that was designed by Deloitte and two of our clients. 83 young women, from Europe and Middle East took part to that whole day. And what was their takeaway? First of all, they learned, thanks to the mentorship of Deloitte professional, how to deal with design thinking. And also they learn about having a vision about that career, because we organized a workshop on female empowerment, facilitated by Rose, during which we invited a female senior leader from Deloitte to talk about, her career, the female hardware behavior, how she transformed these, I will say, maybe false beliefs in strengths. What was the role of her sponsor in her life? And the very recent example of this is the Coding Boot Camp, which was a workshop organized with SheTech, which is a non-profit organization aiming at reducing the female gap in STEM, about Java programming. And together with our female women in tech community, mentors from our community help the young female to learn, all this program, and also to learn from role models who are having a successful career in STEM. So these are two examples.
Yeah. Great. So what we've been hearing really is also here, just a lot of, there's this balance or dance between skills and education, but also visionary, getting people to open up their mindsets. And actually, I want to switch steam a little bit for Heidi. Heidi, you've heard everybody talk about sort of the existing state, the kinds of things we're working on. From your perspective, what are you seeing at ADB as the big challenges for the new emerging leaders, right? So there's a group of leaders now that have to adapt and get mindset, but we've got a whole new set of young leaders who are going to be leading in the next over the next few years. What do you think the key challenges are? What do you think some of the issues that are going to keep them up at night are? What do you think they have to make visible? Like for older women, we said menopause and other mental health issues, I raised my hand, but what about these younger people?
Thanks, Rose. A very important question. And I think just to the point that we discussed prior to going live today, we probably should have had a representative from that generation also in this panel today,
yes.
right? So we can tend to and pretend to be experts, but yeah, the real experts are out there. But I think we need to be prepared for the future generations. We know they are the leaders of tomorrow, and how well we are able to prepare right now is directly linked to how well we will succeed in the future. And we know, of course, that new generations will bring new perspectives to the organization, but they will also require a different way of working and interacting. And we see that now. They are much more driven by purpose, much more driven by purpose than power, position. It's about networking. There are very short distances between the management and the grassroots, so to speak. And the purpose-driven approach is really critical, I would say, in this context. People would like, in the young generation more than any, would like to work for a company that is clearly having a translated and articulated purpose. If we then also look to gender equality in this context, we know that the upcoming female generation is a new era of female talent with higher participation in workforce and also higher levels of confidence and career ambition. And I think we have Alison here as the absolute expert on this, but studies also indicate that the new generation believe work-life balance is achievable, and they don't see gender bias as an issue. And at ABB, we work a lot around the biases that we all have. And very promising then to hear that the upcoming generation don't see this as an issue or as an obstacle. So it's a promising generation of men and women, and I really hope that they will accelerate the progress already made towards diversity and inclusion. Another point that I would like to make is also that we must acknowledge that having 5 generations in workplace requires different drivers, motivators, and leadership, as mentioned. And there is no one fits all to this. I believe in the importance of adapted leadership. And of course, we have some generic trends for each generation. And we know also that trust-based leadership with the focus on empathy, transparency, communications, they are predictors of success on a very high generic level. However, we are all different, and we are really triggered by different elements. And I think that's very important not to forget, not to bucket it under generations, but to also not to forget. We must have that ability to adjust and adapt on individual level. And I think that's where really the magic is laying, when we're able to see both those elements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. Yeah, we're all in the end individuals, and we all care individually for our companies. So that's the trick. Somebody once said the job of an organization is to be a great gardener. Give the roses what they need, the weeds what they need, the huge trees what they need. So that it's together. It's beautiful, and I love that image. We're going to go now, I think, to, have I remembered? Yes, I think I've gone through everybody. So what I would like to do now is go to more, one of the things that we've been asked before by audiences, can you give us some sort of concrete ideas and examples that we can either adopt in our companies or think about or start conversations? So I would like to ask a question to Alison and Heidi. Both of you have been talking about sort of, whether it's the next generation or women, an underrepresented group. And, sometimes there's resistance or debate. I mean, nobody likes to say there's debate because everybody wants to feel like they're on board, right? But there is resistance to today across a generation sometimes, or in different groups, to giving underrepresented groups of people a voice and giving them a spotlight. And I was wondering, what are some of the issues we really need to get over and get past in order to really unite it? Because we want, as we said, a beautiful garden where we need all these different plants, right? What, in your experience, have you seen are the kinds of things companies can think about that are working to really get everybody sort of there?
You want to go first, Alison?
Oh, you go first, Heidi. I'll go after you.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you. No, I think it's a very important discussion that we need to take, and I think it's also a topic we need to be mindful of in order to progress. Because what we see and what we really want to have a focus on is that once we start prioritizing one group, suddenly another group starts feeling excluded, and we do not want to have that feeling in the organization. So it's not because we are opening the talent pool to really include everyone that we want to be exclusive of anyone. So, and I think it can often be perceived like this, and we might also end up with a hostility, of us against them. And that's really not very productive. And if we are not able to communicate and create a narrative that is inclusive and creating a story towards a prosperous future, we will not gain anything. We will all lose. And it's not because there is a seat at the table for women that men should not be there, or because we would like to provide opportunities for younger professionals that seniors are outdated or excluded. Or like we heard earlier also, that because we want to be inclusive of people belonging to the LGBTQ community, that there are no room for those not belonging. So again, the narrative must be around equal opportunity and how every individual should have access to the same opportunities for growth and development. And how can we together create that environment of belonging, respect, and as you mentioned, unity. And I think that's really important. So we see this more holistically. It's not about me, I'm feeling threatened because someone is taking my space. No, it should be space for all of us. And that should be seen as being the best for the individual, the team, the workplace, and ultimately the community. And I would like to mention the values of ABB. So at ABB, we have 4 core values: curiosity, courage, care, and collaboration. And I believe all of those values translated into behaviors are strong levers of progress, and also spot on in terms of what we discuss right now. If you think about courage to lean into the unknown and also sometimes the uncomfortable, because what we don't know, it's uncomfortable. Curiosity, my favorite value of all times, and also something that I really try to teach my children, to never stop being curious. But curiosity to learn and understand more about what's different to us, and also what's different to what we're used to. So we shouldn't be afraid of it. Care, of course, for our colleagues and the people around us, independently of the differences or the past history. And last but not least, collaborating for the common good. And I think that's, a message I would really like to convey. Curiosity, courage, care, and collaboration. And with that, over to you, Alison.
It's done. The question is beautiful answer. I'll just add a little. I mean, courage and curiosity are what we see as inclusive leadership behavior. So it's spot on in the way. I would say to tap into the curiosity, and then I want to go into race, ethnicity, and talk about that as well, the underrepresented groups. If you're curious, it means, and I'm American and Swiss, so now my American side is coming out. If something jiggles your jello, that is your jello. That's your work. And I always say, in this space, we do face a lot of resistance. I don't think I would have signed up for the work had I known how much resistance I would face. But I came to a point where I realized that it is just coming from a place of fear. And my role is just to create a psychological safe space for people to dialogue. They're going to get it wrong. It's not about getting it right. It's not about, oh, you said this, you're out. It's not that. It's about, picking up on what Heidi said, collaborating, the unity, seeing that, this is for the better of all. But I have to highlight that when we talk about, well, first of all, let's just go. The impact of COVID and the murder of George Floyd has sparked a global discussion of racial and ethnic inequity. We saw it with COVID. Who was the most impacted globally? But it also highlights, coming to the underrepresented discussion about underrepresented groups, it highlights that racism is a global issue. It shows up in different ways, in different contexts, in different countries for different reasons, but it's there. And so it underscores the responsibility of employers and all of us to address those workplace inequities. But around the world, underrepresented groups and ethnic groups not only face racism, they face unconscious bias and an emotional tax, which is research we've done in the US and Canada, where we can measure, where we do research specifically on the emotional tax of people of color. And what we find that they experience that on a daily basis that white people are not experiencing. So we have to really make sure that we educate ourselves. We are aware when microaggressions happen, we call them out, but we lead inclusively, as many have shared and Christelle shared as well, like the intersectional approach as well, being mindful of that. But taking individual action, this is not a time to be silent on that specific topic. And so one of the things, and I'll end it with this, is we really need to have constructive dialogue and dismantle, I would say, systemic structures that are systematically advantaging some and systematically disadvantaging others.
Yeah. And so here's where I'm going to put in my little marketing plug, if I might, for Diversity Magazine. No, they didn't ask me to do it, but I actually believe magazines like that, but the work that so many of you are doing, as you said, the words that really resonate with me in this kind of a discussion are collaboration, are care. So yes, we do want to help those who don't have a voice get that voice, get a stake, not just a place at the table, but be heard at the table. Absolutely. But we also needed to do it with care. We need to do it with curiosity for those who are actually and really, sort of destabilized by this. Now, sometimes care might be tough love, as we say in the US, but denigration and just sort of attacking doesn't always work. And so I think forums like this, where everybody's kind of coming with their own ideas and questioning what we're doing and sharing what we're doing is the way to go. And you can read more about it in Diversity Magazine. Close my marketing parentheses.
And just to add something, I think the concept of allyship is fundamental.
Yeah.
Combined with curiosity, care, and courage.
Yeah. Well, actually, Christelle, I was going to come to you next and ask you, because I know you've been researching it, studying it, and with Deloitte, you've also been looking at, what are the skills that we need, right, across generations. We talked about values. And a lot of people know what the values are, but like, what do I need to do, and how do I become more inclusive, right? If I'm at A, how do I get to B? Could you help talk us through some of the things that you've been doing at Deloitte, or you've seen through Deloitte, and again, learnings from that?
Okay. So we all are experiencing now a real disruptive organizational change in companies now that cannot be separated from a culture change that should and have to include both the role of leadership and the expectation of younger generation. And in that, concerning the hybrid work environment, the younger generation are asking about autonomy, which is for other generation maybe a new concept, because the classic organization maybe does not value so much autonomy, right? So by autonomy, they means to be the primary decision maker of where and when they will do their work. Okay, and recent studies have stressed out that really it's more important than any benefit. So for the younger generation, it's really important to feel heard, taken into account what they are asking for, greater autonomy, which is a very important component of motivation, a key driver for performance, individual inclusion, and therefore individual well-being. And this autonomy concept has been outlined by a research conducted in 1985 by two American psychologists, Richard Ryan and Edward Deci, and in which they challenge the common prevailing notion of reward as a main driver of motivation in humans, and so outlining the self-determination, which is made of autonomy, fulfillment, and connection. So to be able, knowing that autonomy surely is a key driver and will be an important factor in this VUCA world and hybrid and work environment. Leaders need to be able, to manage their teams in that way. So it is needed to have a shift of mindset and of leadership style. So for that, Deloitte, for many years, have been studying and came up with a model of inclusive leadership, which is declined in 6 signature traits, which are courage, commitment, cognizance of bias, curiosity, cultural intelligence, and collaboration. So these key skills are really driver for the change and the ability also to include younger generation need, but also the need more and more for companies to become flatter, to cope with this VUCA world. So example of, for example, and these skills in terms of, I can take 2 examples. Curiosity is essential, really, to listen and evaluate all the perspective, encouraging and also people to express their different ideas and to stimulate the expression of cognitive diversity with a key driver of innovation. Collaboration, which is linked also to autonomy, which is required by younger generation, is about also giving the right tool and training to help people develop, get empowered with their skills, demonstrating trust and creating psychological safety in the teams to learn, contribute, and challenge the status quo. That is why we are really focusing on developing these 6 traits.
Yeah. And so we're seeing these themes of collaboration, curiosity, care, and how does that roll out, and how do we move from sort of intent to implementation in the workplace? So I'd like to actually ask that question to Monica and Anis. I know when we were talking before, you had both talked about very sort of creative and interesting ways to make sure that companies are really reaching their people wherever they're at, right? And that we have a buffet, if you want, of benefits, programs, connection and touch points so that people get what they need. Could you give us some examples of what your companies are doing and how they're working and how they've been received?
Absolutely. Anis, if you don't mind, I will start because I can't just wait to participate in the discussion. I really loved this concept of giving autonomy and deciding about themselves among employees, and this is exactly what we do at State Street. So definitely needs of employees depend not only on their age but on their life stage. Depending, doesn't matter what age group they belong sometimes. What more important is what drives them at this particular stage of life. I will say that one of the biggest groups in Poland are interested in support, for example, for working parents, right? But also networking opportunities, building relations and education for less experienced staff is in demand. Programs supporting future and current parents, like coaching on parental skills, time management, efficiency, controlling stress, anxiety, communication skills, non-violent communication are exactly these topics that are very well seen and even expected by most of our staff. And this would go not only to the, let's say, employees population, but also managers, because in order to be able to support their teams, they need to get skilled as well. And of course, in such locations like Poland, for example, we know that the majority of our managers are very young people. So many of them are already millennials, right? And they equally with their staff need to really, create opportunities to educate themselves as well and raise the skills and competences, also in communication. But also what I wanted to mention are the programs supporting also sharing caring roles, not only for parents, but also for parents of kids, but also employees providing support for the aging parents. So this is also a very important topic that I think is just right now being raised across Europe, at least, because people were underestimating that aspect that we, even if we don't have kids on our own, we are very often sooner or later engaged in caring roles for our parents. And this is a natural process, right? So companies and employers need to realize that except from engagement and dedication and loyalty of the employees, they also need to ensure that flexibility in operating, so flex mode of working, working from home. This is one of the greatest achievements or positive outcomes of, for example, COVID, right? We all know that so many companies globally that were not working remotely to such an extent, they were forced to do that. And suddenly it turned out that now employees, especially the young ones, don't want to come back to the offices in majority. They prefer working from home because they have much more flexibility also in caring roles or, like marrying different social roles that they do have on a daily basis, right? And I also wanted to mention some kind of volunteering programs, because we were talking about autonomy. So in our case, this is very much about employee networks. And we have excellent examples of networks in every location where we operate, because only in EMEA, where we support IDE initiatives across 9 EMEA countries, we have over 50 employee networks. And, these topics range from environment through parenting, family networks, Bible study groups, even in some of our countries. We do have, of course, Pride program, global allyship program as well, along with the employee networks present in EMEA. We try to support different topics, including, of course, race and ethnicity, people with disabilities. This is a huge trend that we are, I hope, pioneering, and I hope many others will follow, or we are somewhere there really initiating the discussion that people with disabilities, especially in young generations, need additional, equity in order to start working in financial and other industries. So there's so much that we need to do still. Programs like mentoring, coaching, even reverse mentoring, based very often on volunteering time, guaranteed by most of our peers in the market. We do have 4 days of volunteering guaranteed for every employee at State Street on annual basis. But in fact, there is a huge group of individuals providing support to different initiatives in many more hours, like after hours, you know, sometimes even over the weekend, even sharing the private space and being engaged, because they see the value in taking decisions, in being accountable, in driving initiatives, in inspiring others. And one of the best examples that I'm so proud of, because this is one of my kids, is a project called Barriers Breaking Opportunity, where we are working with our social partner, Stella Virium Foundation, and they received a grant from State Street Foundation the previous year. And this year, with help of over 50 volunteers across State Street, not only in Poland, but also other locations, all these people were working to support people who in the market are at the risk of social exclusion because of diversity aspects. For example, exactly, people with disabilities, immigrants, people are not speaking Polish sometimes coming to Poland. Also very young people without formal, you know, university education, but very talented, skilled in languages and looking for new opportunities. So this barrier breaking opportunity was not only focusing on the beneficiaries, but also educating our managers. We were calling them diversity pilots or champions, because our expectation was, because they were trained and coached within the program, to open themselves for more diverse teams. So at the same time, we were, you know, supporting different groups of stakeholders, making sure that everybody will benefit of this initiative.
Right.
So just to summarize, for example, other great, I think, inspirational cross-generational conversations happening, especially in our Western locations, and this is stimulated by Next Gen Employee Network, that is mainly attracting the attention of millennials, and they are acting actually as this bridge, creating opportunity for a dialogue and also enabling continuous learning curve for all employees, because they are benefiting, but of course this is not limited to that audience only. Leadership talks, engaging more senior individuals into sharing their experiences, you know, ideas, how to best build your career, how to, you know, look for support, how to look for a mentor. All these topics are extremely important, including our professional women's network that is absolutely using that model of engaging for a conversation senior female leaders as role models is absolutely fantastic, and always dozens, or if not hundreds of people attending such sessions. So I think that the aspect of respect and appreciation is the main value if we want to ensure really inclusive workplace from the age perspective.
Yeah. Thank you. A wide reach. Anis?
Absolutely. Thank you, Monica. You covered most of it. And maybe what I can do is to really sum up in terms of 3 examples in terms of how we are considering the age cohorts while we think about cross-generational intelligence. Now, with these difficult times, especially pandemic, many of you would have heard about how SAP is committed to pledge to Flex. Now, while we planned for global flex work guideline, and when I look at it, how we started, this started many years ago, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. And we looked into the deeper meaning of the term workplace itself to realize that work is an activity that you do and not just a place, right? And it should be a trust-based workplace, should be a norm, and it should not be something which is kind of limited to where you're working from. So to get the best out of our employees, of everyone, we needed to address every employee's preference across all age groups, across all age cohorts, because our lives are closely linked to the way we work. and more so during this pandemic. It's so important to consider this aspect. So flexibility in work was not just where you work from, it included when you work and how you work. And this considered all aspects of diversity. It definitely considered gender and geography, but it also considered generations, impairments, and even cognitive and neurodiversity. After considering this, we did not box anybody saying that, oh, if you have this diversity or if you're a millennial, you should use this flexibility. No. What we did was we considered all of the needs across age cohorts, but we gave the choice within a framework to our employees. So it will not stop anyone from saying, oh, this is what I prefer, but I am in this diversity, I cannot take it. No, but it is, if it is a need that you have, you can take it. Like Monica mentioned, somebody might want to work from home if there is a need for them to attend to an elderly relative. But some others might want to pursue higher studies, and so they might work maybe in the evenings. Similarly, working with options of flexi time, flexi work, and flex options are what will help to meet these needs of the age cohorts and improve productivity for everyone. It goes back to the point of giving that choice, having the autonomy. Yes, of course, it will be within the frames of work of any corporate or any company, but at least you have the autonomy to choose. The other aspect of flexibility I wanted to highlight is flexi benefits. Now, those days are gone. This goes back to my previous point in terms of employee aspiration. Those days are gone that, as an employer, we can give a set of benefits and everybody just accepts it. Today, employees are asking, my need is different. I not only want to insure my immediate family, but I want to also give health insurance to my parents. But there might be groups of people who now say that my parents are still working and they have their own health insurance. You don't have to give me parental insurance. Give me maybe a subscription to a gym, right? So based on this, flexible benefits also is something that we are thinking about based on the cohorts. Now we have heard about flexibility. The other aspect that I want to talk about, especially when it comes to working together with different generations, is how do we go deeper than the awareness level? How do we bring in this? How do we give a platform for improving that curiosity? How do we give the platform for improving that collaboration? In fact, even in SAP, to talk about the growth mindset, we also give a simple tip. We call it CARE, collaboration, asking, respect, and equality. So in order to do this deeper, what we came about was just not reverse mentoring, but cross-generational mentoring. Now, cross-generational mentoring was similar to any other mentoring with two significant differences. One, it is everyone is a mentor in cross-generational mentoring. The mentor and the mentee both are mentors. You learn from each other. The second is whenever you do cross-generational mentoring, you ask the question why, so that you understand deeper on why the other person did something this way or that way. Now, what does this help with? This helps with knowledge transference from one generation to the other. It builds a strong sense of belonging because you learn to understand the commonalities and respect the differences. And to some extent, even retain the knowledge from those leaving the workforce. Now, I know, we've talked a lot in terms of different things. Even cross-generational mentoring in SAP, we have tried to embed it into our best practices. From my perspective, in terms of highlighting some of the benefit, some of the programs, these are three or two of them. What is important to remember is that these programs might appear somewhat complicated, that it might be something that we did keeping in mind diversity or keeping in mind cross-generation, but no. What we have experienced is that the sooner we embed it into the employee engagement, the more sustainable it is. Over to you, Rose.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? That it's easier to learn and adapt the earlier you get to know things. So yeah, absolutely hear that. Pavel, you get the last formal question of the afternoon before we then ask our audience as well if they have any questions. So we've talked a lot about courage, care, curiosity, collaboration, and how an organization can manifest it. I guess my question to you is much more around activism, which is part of East and West. And you know, I feel that what I see often is that there's a skew, right, around issues. There's people who are interested, people who are not interested, but in some other issue, there's another skew. And my question is, you know, how do we get people, again, we've sort of talked about this in very different ways because it always boils down to that, right? How do we get people on the same boat? Because in an organization, it's great to bring your diversity and bring your whole self. But how do we do it in a way that's constructive and moves people forward? And I was wondering if you could talk to us with respect to, again, age and LGBTIQ community.
Sure. I mean, if Rosie, if you don't mind, I would first go back to a little bit is this whole LGBTIQ and generations, because I think would fit this panel to give a bit more maybe specifics, right? So is there anything specific when we talk about generations and when we talk about LGBTIQ? I already said in the first part that there is a difference when it comes to the coming out, right? So people tend to come out, the young generations tend to come out earlier. There's been several studies recently. There was one in Britain which was looking at people over 60. So in their cases, the average coming out year was 37, so 40 years. But when they were looking at the age of 30, then it was suddenly dropping to 20. And the millennials, so I don't know, like 18 to 24, 25, this would be around 17. And another study which I found was basically saying the same thing. So I think this is one important thing to understand in the whole corporate environment, that there is a difference between the young generation and maybe the older generation in regards to coming out, and maybe have reasonable expectations towards the different generations, especially the older generation. The second one, what I wanted to share, and I think it's also valid in this context of generations, is when you look at the fresh people, like so those who are entering the workplace. The recent out at work barometer actually, which was over, I think, 2,000 representatives, they found out that the first year is critical for coming out, and 70% of those who are, I don't know, graduates who came to workplace were coming out the first year. So I think this also has a certain implication, looking at it from this whole perspective of different generations, that the younger generation, which means that they are those who are coming to workplace, they need to be supported. And unless there is a support, we might actually very easily lose them. Now, coming back to your question, when it comes to, so how do we actually bring everybody on the same boat? I think it's mainly by listening. Trying to listen, trying to understand the different backgrounds of people. And it was said by all of you today on the call that there is actually one thing is the generation, but second thing is the stage of life. And let's not basically take I don't know, the generation in a stereotypic way, right? Because they are not. Even me myself, yes, I'm a gay man. I'm out gay man in business, but at the same time, I'm not belonging to this dinkies group, which should be double income, no kids. No, because we have a child. So it's basically so. I mean, and the stories are unique, and every person deserves a bit of, I don't know, like a deeper look and deeper understanding. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, great. Well, so some of the common themes, and please, if anybody wants to add anything of the speakers, please jump in. Is this sort of this movement that that having so many, or maybe it's a time now that there's much more intersection between personal growth and professional growth, and organizations are expected to provide both, and need to find new ways to keep people interested and engaged in both areas. This idea also that not any single group is a monolith, we're all individuals. It's not women in one group and LGBTIQ in one group and Asians in one group, but each one of us, and just sort of the complexity of finding out offerings to keep everyone involved, wherever you are on the age spectrum. Does anybody have any comment, observation to add from the panel? Yes, Heidi?
Yes, so I actually have an observation or comment to add on the flexible working practices you're mentioning. So we speak a lot around the fantastic opportunity that we've been provided by proving that overnight we're able to do our work, from home, all of us or most of us. And, before the pandemic, we tried to implement flexible working, knowing that this will facilitate, the various life cycle of our employees. But what I think we should be mindful of also, because yes, it is fantastic. Yes, and it's supportive. But we must remember that if we are constantly remote, whereas parts of the team will be physically together, you will also not be remembered, considered, and heard. It's easy to be that person, when decisions are made at the water cooler or the coffee machine, or where people are suddenly presented in front of you in discussions where you are making decisions straight afterwards. We're back to the biases again that we know all about. You need also to be visible and seen and heard. So we cannot believe that flexible working, meaning remote working constantly, is the answer, because then we will see. And unfortunately, back to Catalyst research, very many women and also then youngsters will do this, and then we will see other people coming together in the office, making those decisions and coming together, networking and sponsoring and so on. And we will continue to grow the gap that we want to close. So I think that's very important that we also bear with us in this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Any other, we don't have, yes, Anis, go ahead.
While Pavel was talking about how there is this whole generation difference across in the LGBTQ community, it reminded me of how things are also changing with many of the diversity and underrepresented groups, that as the newer generations are getting into the workforce, their understanding of the workplace, their rights as employees and as human beings have also significantly improved. When a decade ago you would give an opportunity for a person with any particular skill, and he or she might have a disability, they would look up at the employer with a lot of gratitude and reverence. But today we have people with disability competing on par, neck to neck, with people without disability as well. And they know their rights, they know what are their benefits, they know what the employer should provide. So I think one big lesson for us in this generation story is every generation brings something very good in each of them, right? And we can actually learn and imbibe from younger generations, from the Generation Xers and the older generations, with their own good value to probably create a society and a company that's a lot more inclusive. So just wanted to share that, since Pavel brought it up. I just remembered this.
And just to add on this one, and then I will be quiet, but I think it's so important what you're saying right there. And it's about social justice. It's about also our employees expecting the companies to take a stand, not only to do the paycheck. So when we saw the Black Lives Matter, Asian hate crimes, and so on, Equality Act in Congress, our employees expect us to take a stand and to drive progress, not only in the workplace, the marketplace, but also in the community. And that's something that we need to, deliver on, and to have that promise and to continue to fight for equality, not only in the workplace, but also in the community. So social justice also is a very important piece in this puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't have any questions from the chat, but I have a WhatsApp question here that I'll try to translate into English. So the question is to everyone. So we'll do a quick round. Is there any other generation you would rather be in today than the one you're in? I hope I translated that correctly. Thoughts?
I'm happy to jump in. No, I'm very happy in this generation. But do I look to other generations? Absolutely. I'm inspired by, the activism that I'm seeing that we have not seen, and and they're going to create changes, and that we probably haven't seen in other generations, including my own.
Right. Any other thoughts, comments? Yeah.
I completely agree. I think I would not like to be in another generation. I'm very happy where I am, but I'm so impressed by the new generation. And I always interact with the new trainees coming in at ABB, and I talk about diversity and inclusion, and I have a dialogue, and I'm amazed and impressed and so fascinated by this activism, by this kind of strength of what we want to do with the world, the planet, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's very inspiring to see, and I believe those behaviors and that activism will drive the change we need.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I will say, I don't want to change generations, but I also don't realize what generation I'm in. I mean, I got offered, I think I might have told some of you, somebody offered their seat in the train the other day to me. I'm 58 years old. I think I should be Beyonce, so for me, that was quite a reckoning. But I do think we're going to see sort of this melting as we go through. I mean, perhaps not now, as people of my generation also, start to look and say, oh, wow, I just didn't think I could do that, or I didn't grow up thinking that, and possibilities open up at both ends, right? Through this.
Yeah, I think it's about embracing all these generation identity, to see the richness and to all evolve, because I think, it can be a very stimulating exchange, to evolve together and for the better good, as Heidi outlined before, because we need this in the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I just had one addition to everything that everybody said. I do love the fact that whatever generation I'm in, I'm very happy, of course, to answer the question. But I also love the camaraderie between two completely opposite generations, especially in the cross-generational mentoring program that I saw. It was simply amazing to see the joy of camaraderie, even though by default we might just make friends with our age group. But when given the opportunity, the kind of vastness of knowledge that comes together is simply amazing. So I love people older than me and younger than me, and I think a cross-generational collaboration is simply awesome going forward.
Great.
And that goes also straight back to when I look at my children and their relationship to the grandparents, or my relationship to my grandmother, who is 92, soon 93. She's the wisest woman I know. She's been my guiding star and my mentor my whole life. Her values and her presence and her courage, which was very unusual for her time. And, I was always so impressed by her strength. And I see that also now with the children, when they speak to the great grandmother, they are also so full of like this, they want to listen, tell the stories about the war, about how she did this and that. And that's a beauty to see that across now 4 generations, but that's on a personal aspect, but that's also very, very important. And I think children learn the respect of hearing those stories because we
Absolutely.
change much more the emotions and perceptions by storytelling and lived experiences.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, I'm at an age where my children are teaching me a lot more about getting myself updated, technology, presentation, you know, but even advice on how to coach senior leaders, right? This is from 25-year-olds, you know, and at the beginning, I was like, what could you possibly have to say to me, you know? But there is this diversity of thought and perspective. So, okay, well, we have just a few minutes. If somebody has something to say, I'm happy to hear it. Maybe we don't have any questions from the chat. Otherwise, I just want to, would anybody like to say a final comment or remark? Yes, Monica?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment to that conversation, because I loved you know, the way we embrace and admire the, you know, all the values of being of every representative of every generation. And I think, and what I admire, except from, of course, great example given by Heidi and our grandparents, I really love also the way to look at the young generation. For example, my daughter, who is 8 at the moment, she's whatever she takes in her hands, she's able to operate with it. No matter what gadget, widget, or whatever it is, physical or, you know, virtual. These very young people that are not still there in the labor market, but will come in a couple of years, will absolutely change the world. We can see these, you know, young generations coming in already with this innovation, digitalization. So our world is changing already, and definitely, you know, dinosaurs like us will need to somehow, to some extent, possible extent, follow, and to some extent be able to also learn, because the new times require, you know, being up to date, as you Rose mentioned, right? We need to be skilled. We need to continue education, raising the bar, and still being also some kind of, you know, authentic leaders for these young people is always, you know, tricky, because we will not inspire them by our digital skills, but we can teach them other values. And I think exactly this is the true value of cross-generational communication and collaboration, that everyone has got something unique to offer. And no matter what times we will be living in, because the times are also, you know, the world is promising us a lot. On the other hand, more and more risks are coming into our, you know, direction. So, and I think that every time that we will face will be equally challenging for every generation. So we'll see how they will manage. We hope that we will be able to support them the best way we can, I hope. And I'd like to say at the end that actually we all need to work together, because only together we are stronger.
Yeah. Well, I think Monica summarized it beautifully for all of us, so thank you. That was lovely. Thank you very much, Diversity Magazine, for always putting on these events for us. Valentina Sorby, who got us all organized and online on time. And of course, thank you to like these wonderful panelists, but not just for being here today, but for, you know, for keeping the fires of dialogue burning and going and pushing that. We all need more of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Rose.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.